So, yeah, David, thank you very, very much for joining me. I sometimes like to interview people who I think are vaguely interesting, and you struck me as somebody who is vaguely interesting. I think we've got a lot to natter about, actually. So I thought I
I'm
would
gonna
just.
put that on the website. Vaguely interesting. That's
I'm sorry. As I get older, I get more and more like my crazy parents, and I say stuff, and then afterwards, I'm like, "Oh, that was quite rude." Now I think about
Don't we all become like our parents worryingly?
it. So, first of all, though, for those who don't know you, who are you?
I This is completely unscripted, by the way. We haven't, even though we've been talking on and off over Instagram messaging for some time. This is the first time, I think, apart from in a couple of book club events where we've kind of interacted a little bit. I think it's the first time. So, yeah. So off the cuff, I am David Lobergellis. I live in the West Midlands here in the UK, smack bang in the centre, kind of near Birmingham. Whenever someone asks me where do you live, I always say Birmingham-ish. Just a couple of hours away from London, and I, since last April, have been running the blog Licensed to Queer, which is something I'd had in my head for a very long time. So I've kind of been getting my writing jollies doing that when I've not been doing the day job, which is in education. So I'm a leader in mostly secondary schools, but I do actually work across several schools at the moment. So yeah, that's a nice challenge, especially at the moment. So writing blogs is a good way to take my mind off things.
Well, I mean, that was so we are both within the like the Bond community, and I love that because we've all got James Bond in common, but in so many different ways. And I remember, I your name of your Instagram account instantly stuck in my head because it's like a great piece of branding, and it always was interesting to me because I've noticed that James Bond always appeals to like an LGBTQ aspect of things. And I always joke, my best friend is gay, and I always joke that I'm a gay man trapped in a straight man's body. And it was so weird that James Bond was something that always appealed to me so much for certain aspects of that. And then I read your blog and I loved it. I thought like the writing and the way you delved into things, it really resonated with me, and I was like, I need to chat to David. Like you just did the you edited and posted something by someone else, a writer called Marcus, about
Oh yes,
OSS
yeah,
17, and like I
yeah.
love those movies. And it's so cool. I go to your blog and I read stuff, and it's like, oh wow, this guy is into the same stuff as I am. And then of course, like I saw you and you like bow ties and you have ginger hair, and I was like, there is a certain crossover in our upbringing there. So
Absolutely.
how did you get into James Bond? Like right from the tell us everything. Oh
I'm
wait,
pretty
actually,
sure it was. Yeah, no.
I'm going to cut you off and say I saw you had a drink earlier.
I do. I'm actually on call for work this weekend with COVID tracing, so this is not a Negroni. This is, I know you might recognize this, but I imagine a lot of people wouldn't. This is Vimto. Do you know,
Oh,
do you know, do you know Vimto?
I do. I was trying to explain to my son what Lucasade was the other day, and I was thought there were these all these really, I'll use the way my mother would say it, all these queer English drinks like Ribena and Lucasade and Vimto and stuff, and it's but Vimto's meant to like pep you up, isn't it?
I'm not sure, to be honest, but I saw it in the supermarket and I thought I haven't had Vimto for about 15 years and I knew I wouldn't be able to drink much this weekend. So I was like, treat myself to some blackcurrant squash or whatever it's supposed to be. There we go. It's a classic British drink. What are you on? I think you're on something more exciting.
No, I'm not. I was actually just going to open a beer, which is fun. I'm the worst Brit ever because I'm really not into soccer and I don't drink tea. But I am a lager lout with the best of them. So I will pour myself this nice pilsner. Well,
That's hardly lager loutish, Roland. That's like some kind of, is that some kind of artisanal pilsner?
no,
You know, it,
it's pilsner Urquell, which is like the just the Czech one. But I kind of like it. I'm a bit of a lager lout, but only. But I can like pass it off and put it in a glass or something.
it could be a can of Carling. You could
Yeah,
like, go there.
I quite like
Or a
Carling actually.
Heineken if we wanted a Bond connection.
I quite like Heineken actually. It's one of I'd say that's my third best bet. Anyway, I interrupted. So David, you were telling me
Yeah,
right
yeah,
from the very beginning about how you got into Bond.
yeah. I'm pretty sure I first saw Goldfinger. It's one of those things. I was really young, like 5 or 6 probably, and my grandparents showed it to me, and my dad had read the books, and I always remember seeing them on the shelf. And because I've always liked reading. I think that's another thing we've got in common. I've always liked reading, and I always read books that were probably a bit too old for me. But I think taking Thunderball to school when I was aged 8 was probably a little bit kind of touching on being a bit precocious / pretentious. I don't know, but I I really loved Thunderball the movie as a kid, and I'd seen quite a few of the Bond films by then. So I read that. It took me like months to read Thunderball as an 8-year-old. As you can probably imagine, I didn't know half of what was going on. So but I really didn't get into the books until I was in my teenage years massively. But I've always, as far as I can really remember, been into the films. And there was a brief period in my 20s where I sort of not completely lost interest in Bond. It was always there, but I couldn't help thinking it was kind of some related to kind of what was going on in my head at the time. And I always saw, perhaps because I saw Bond as this really kind of straight masculine thing, which clearly isn't, as I've been exploring at some length on the website. But I think, but apart from those few years in my early 20s, I've always been but that's my washing machine going, by the way. It plays a bit of Schubert. So I don't know why, but that's the tune. So if you're wondering what that beeping noise was in the background.
I have the same washing machine, and it does that. And the weird thing is, it just goes on. It's like it does it for a reasonable amount of time. And you're like, that's a good time to stop, and then it plays. It continues. But
I know 30 seconds of Di Farello. Apologies if I mangled the pronunciation there. Your French pronunciation earlier on was lovely, by the way. But then again, you've got experience there, haven't you? Anyway, we'll probably get to that in a bit. So yeah, I love Bond to the extent that I think it's probably my primary passion. I'm interested in lots of things, but I relate Bond to every kind of everyday situation. I use like lines from the film in everyday situations. Most people, it goes completely over their heads. And certainly getting, as a result of lockdown, I've doubled down and everything that's been going on for the last year and a bit. I've kind of doubled down on all of it really and got really involved in the online community because I knew a few people before, but not massively. So that's all kind of taken off quite recently. I just kind of kept my obsession to myself, and my husband tolerates it. Good job, really. That would be a deal breaker. If he's someone who would never want to watch a James Bond film, I'm not sure we would have stayed together very long. But we've been together. We've been together over a decade, and he's getting sort of more involved with the site and that kind of thing as well. He sometimes contributes ideas, and he's very helpful from a tech standpoint as well, because I'm not very technologically minded, but no, he's invaluable in that. But yeah, that's where we are.
I hope he's listening to this.
He will be. He's upstairs somewhere. Yeah, he's upstairs somewhere. He'll probably come down and take the washing out in a minute. He'll probably get a cameo through the door.
So what aspect of the whole James Bond thing resonated with you?
You know what, Roland, I set up the website, and I'd had the idea in my head for some years, but I just hadn't, had the opportunity to do anything with it. I've had this, it's still a question, and I set it up as a question when I started the website, and the mission hasn't really changed much. I think I originally wrote my Instagram and Twitter bio as a mission to uncover why James Bond appeals to so many LGBTQ plus people. And I'll be honest, when I first wrote that, it was more of a hypothesis. I was hoping to be proven correct that it did appeal to a lot of LGBTQ plus people. I was so gratified to find out it did, because there weren't many queer voices that I had come across. I get really, really frustrated when I used to read a reference work on Bond and there was no queer point of view in there whatsoever. So and for me, it's always been really, really queer, the way that it deals with gender and ideas of masculinity. I love any kind of, like, my other favorite film genre apart from Bond, if we want to say it's a genre unto itself, is American Westerns and also spaghetti Westerns. I love Westerns because they deal with masculinity all the time. They're men in extreme circumstances, and you always think of the archetypal John Wayne figure, but actually that most Westerns are some kind of probing of masculinity. I think that's probably why I like Bond so much, because it's like an alternative version of masculinity. You know, if we're talking about football, which is omnipresent in English culture at the moment because of the Euros going on, James Bond, you can't imagine him playing football.
No.
And you know, he's even Fleming in the obituary in You Only Live Twice says that he was athletic but never mentions team sports. And you can't imagine, you know, unless you count golf, not really a team, but you know, you can't imagine. He's not very kind of sporty. And if you think about those masculine stereotypes, Bond doesn't actually live up to an awful lot of them.
Yeah.
Really, which is why I find it so weird that so many people say he's the ultimate man, and you look at what a stereotypical man, all of those associations, and it's like, does a stereotypical man get really pernickety about, you know, what he's drinking and what he's eating and what he's wearing and ladies' perfumes and, you know, all that stuff? It's is that something that you see in the character?
I think that's, first of all, the whole Westerns thing is amazing. I'm trying to look, because I was obsessed with cowboys as a kid.
Yeah.
And that was my whole thing. I've got all these like leather-bound cowboy books that I had as a child.
Oh, wow.
I find that really interesting. But I absolutely agree with you. For me, the thing that always resonated about Bond as a character is he seemed kind of alone, kind of isolated, kind of solitary. He liked solitary pursuits, and I grew up, my brother and sister were much older than with me, so I kind of grew up without people around me, and then I was Eurotrash and I just enjoyed traveling around on my own, and it's that solitude and solitariness, and you develop these little persnickety habits and things, but it's kind of fun, and it resonated with me.
Yeah, I think so. He's that lone figure, and it's quite strange that in the more recent films they've kind of started to build more team dynamic around Bond, and I think some people, whether they're consciously aware of it, struggle with that, because I think that solitary nature appeals to lots of people, you know, not just queer people, people who are bullied, which we'll probably get onto when we get to gingerism in a minute.
Absolutely.
So anyone who was left to feel like any kind of outsider or other, I think the character resonates with. And this is an overlooked, I'm writing something about this at the moment actually, but I've had it on the back burner for ages, but a lot of people overlook that Bond is quite an outsider as a character. People often think of him as like the ultimate institution figure, but certainly in the novels, like Fleming, there's that extraordinary passage in Moonraker where Bond ruminates on feeling completely out of place at M's club, and he imagines what everyone in the club is thinking about him, and thinking that this chap doesn't fit in here. And Bond is incredibly self-conscious in the books about his outsider status, and even in the films, you know, very little of it takes place in the UK. It's kind of happened a bit more recently, and I think that's because even though he's like the bastion of Britishness, he's actually quite other. Yeah.
Oh, that absolutely. It's fun. When I first like moved to France full time in 2000, I loved it because I felt more British, but also more myself by being completely isolated, and it was, and oh yeah, the being bullied. I find some of the introspection with the way Ian Fleming describes things. That scene in Moonraker, yeah, it's like that. I read that and it resonated really deeply with me because in my past I was a lot more self-conscious, and I felt like that any situation, especially like in England. I've always felt so much happier not being in England, because you mentioned like the whole sportsy thing. I felt like an alien when I was around like the rugby club or something like that. I literally felt like an alien. I was like, I can do the things like speak and stuff, but I have no communication with you at all. I do not understand. Like, I don't know. That was just something that always resonated with me. And then Ian Fleming kind of like made me feel like there was another human being who felt like that.
I suppose what you've just described there sounds to me a lot like what quite a few queer people sometimes refer to as passing. So you can blend in with an environment, but you feel very outside it at the same time. So if I ever wanted to, and I did for a big chunk of my life, I could pass for straight if I wanted to, And there are, you know, some trans people who talk about passing for passing for a different gender. And I think that's definitely something to do with spies. That idea that you hope to fit in an environment, and even though you know that you don't fit in, but you can just about get away with passing, you know, even as a, you know, if you're a spy, a different nationality, you know, a different occupation, whatever. And it's really interesting what you just said about being in a rugby club. So are you into rugby?
No, I'm not. I've always liked the solitary sports like swimming and shooting and riding and stuff like that, which was another thing that you're not. It's so weird to talk because it's like
I
clearly we're on the same wavelength.
the only thing I really like doing sport wise, and I wrote something about this fairly recently about exercise, and I like running
Yeah.
that because it is something you just do on your own. I know you can do, you know, I did once do a half marathon, God knows how. I was ever that physically fit, but you know, you can do it as a group activity, but even when you're with a group, you kind of just do your own thing anyway, don't you? And it's really interesting that Bond is a runner, and particularly, I don't know if you've read the Young Bond books,
I
the
have
ones
Charlie
that
Higson's
Charlie Hicks,
books.
yeah,
Oh my god!
and
And you
he,
just talk about Charlie Higson from the Fast Show with the subtext of
oh,
his. Anyway, that's I digress. But Charlie Higson's
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah, absolutely, and that whole first book, well, at least the first half of that book is about Bond as a runner, and that's how he kind of gets his athletic reputation. So you can see that Charlie Higson mined all the stuff that Fleming had put in there about, which is not a lot, about Bond's childhood, but ran with that. Sorry, terrible. Yeah, definitely that solitary side of the character, I think, does appeal to lots of queer people. Yeah.
That's I've always found that so fascinating. And then there is, of course, like the attention to detail and things that he likes with the way he drinks his coffee and the way he thinks that, which is kind of I don't know. It's those are kind of very British characteristics, I would say, but I almost think they're like very specific to like his class and the fact that he came from like an international background and things. Um,
It's a yeah, it's an upper class. If it's an upper class Britishness, isn't it? Because there is that mentality that I find really frustrating. That a lot of Brits will just put up with really bad service, and if something arrives in a restaurant and it's not how it should be, people, certainly my family, most of them will just go like, "Oh, we don't want to cause a fuss." And I'm just like, but you're paying for this, so why would you not send it back, or, you know, ask for it to be better, you know, politely, obviously. So I definitely think it's a bit of a, so I'm not sure that's a middle class thing or a working
I
class or
think that's
lower
very
class
middle
thing.
class, isn't it?
Yeah, I think perhaps yeah, definitely. I think that and obviously Fleming was writing for that post-war audience for whom all of that was incredibly aspirational. I always think of the avocado pear. I always come back to the avocado pear, and I'm just like,
Don't we
he
all?
orders an avocado for dessert. What? He does it in one of the others as well, doesn't he? It's not just in Casino Royale. I'm sure he orders an avocado for dessert. Can you imagine having? Well, I don't know. I don't want to judge. Have you ever had an avocado for dessert?
No, I haven't. I'll admit my family's got into avocado toasts, and we go to. And I had an uncle who
Oh
lived in
yeah.
Africa, and when he came for my sister's wedding, he brought a suitcase with nothing but avocados in it.
Wow.
So avocados,
Worth its weight in gold in the UK at the moment. Avocados are expensive.
limes as well for some bizarre reason compared to America. You
Mm.
go like they're free. Anyway, we should not. We're going to go off on dangerous tangents if
We've
we
got
let
on
ourselves.
tangents already. We knew this would happen.
So there was another thing that you and I obviously share in common, which is our beautiful ginger hair. Although mine's going a bit grayer these days. And
Same.
yeah, I one of the other things that always appealed to me about Bond with his solitariness and stuff like that was the fact that I got bullied a lot. Like it
Yeah.
was, and it was kind of I try and explain it to American people, and they think I'm making it up. It's like there was not a single day of my life in the UK where I wouldn't walk down a street and have someone drive past and be like, "Oi, ginger!" It's like I could never go to a pub without someone coming up and being like, "Oh, what's shagging Billy Piper like?" And like every single day there'd be something like that happening, which was, and moving abroad, it just stopped. And it's like that's one of the reasons why I don't think I could ever live in the UK again. And so tell me about your experiences, whether I
Yeah,
sound
I
crazy.
mean, I can't decide whether I was bullied more for being gay or ginger. I think it's kind of, I don't know. I was extensively bullied at school. I always, whenever I do I've done quite a few conference presentations about bullying and that kind of thing. And I sometimes start it off by telling the audience that I've got something I need to get out there, some secret that I've felt ashamed about for many years, but I've finally owned it, and I'm proud. And of course, they're expecting me to go, I'm gay, do the whole big coming out thing, which of course queer people have to do for the whole of their life. And then I say, I'm ginger. So it's like, so it plays on the idea of yeah. I mean, children will always find a reason to pick on somebody who's different. And I came across an interesting quote the other day, actually, that said that the reason why ginger people get bullied quite so much is because they're too rare to be accepted in society, but there's also too many of them to be ignored. So it's kind of like, if something is really, really rare, then you can just no one really picks up on it. Whereas there's just enough there for it to be a cultural thing, and all those stereotypes to exist. I mean, I think it's something like 2% of the world's population are ginger. Is that about right? Does that sound
I've
about
heard
right?
that as well, and I think it's like in the UK it's 13%, which is like the highest concentration in
Wow.
the world. But otherwhere everywhere else it's 2%.
Whenever That's interesting, because whenever I've been on holiday to particularly places in China or Japan, it's really strange because I get a glimpse of what it might be like to be a bit of a celebrity. Because even if you're walking through Shibuya in Tokyo, you'll get not always girls, but it just tend to be girls. You'll get groups of people come up to you, and I've had this happen so many times, and just ask you for a picture. And at first, I thought, when I went on holiday with my husband to Tokyo for the first time, I thought this is because we're just foreigners, and but then again, they must have quite a few foreigners in the center of Tokyo. But then when they came to take the photo, my husband stepped up as well, and he hasn't quite forgiven me for this. But then he said, and then it was just like, no, not you, and just wanted a photo with me. And so I was just like, okay, clearly it's the ginger thing. So my advice is, Roland, maybe we should go more to countries where we are treated like celebrities, and therefore we won't be as stigmatized as we are at home.
I was in India last year, and it was the same thing. It's like everywhere people just wanted pictures with me, and it was kind of I was like, it's bizarre, but it was kind of cool. People thought it was cool.
It's kind of flattering. Yeah, exactly. I
I
know, I know you only want the photo for the hair, but
When I first moved to France, that was it because I been bullied, and of course I never got a girlfriend because I was ginger. I had one girlfriend who actually. There was a picture of me and my best friend, and she told her parents that she was going out with a best friend, uh, rather than me because I was ginger. And so
oh wow.
when I went to France, girls were like, "Oh, it's so pretty and mignon," and they're like running their fingers through my hair, and I was like, "Oh, I could get used to this."
Yeah.
Um,
No, I totally understand why you would want to. So how long did you spend across Europe?
I moved there in 2000, and I moved to America end of, November 2001. But I went back and forth. I was working in Paris and New York, and it was kind of perfect. Those were like my Eurotrash transcontinental days. That but it was great. It's like yeah, you can everything about being British that you like, you get to keep, but then you take all the stuff that kind of sucks about that experience out. But it's like you stayed at home, and I think it's really cool that you've got into like the education system because you touch the minds of so many like young people in so many important ways. And I think these days, as people become more accepting of like people who are queer, people who are ginger, people who everything. Or I mean, I don't know. It seems like it's a very important and formative period in like the evolution of man right now.
Yeah, it is, and I have done quite a lot of work on, and I've done some work for the for the British government. I always like saying that, like James Bond. I work for the British government, which technically I do, like many other people. But I've done quite a lot of work for the government on particularly homophobic, biphobic, and transphobic bullying. I've never actually done anything beyond the odd conference kind of joke and folding into my presentation, specifically on ginger bullying. But I have no doubt that it's still rife in many schools. The schools that I know, it's not especially. So I know a lot of schools don't tolerate the kind of levels of bullying that you and I experienced when we were at school. But yeah, it is a period of change. I always get really frustrated that social change doesn't happen more quickly, but it is quite an exciting time at the moment. Yeah.
It's funny because so much has changed so quickly. I was watching with my kids Ace Ventura: Pet Detective the other day,
Ooh.
and it was funny. I remember when I first saw that movie, I thought it was hysterical. And then watching it, it's like this isn't right. This is like there is
absolutely.
But the funny thing with
no, go on.
Oh no, it sounds like you're going to say something really interesting.
Yeah, I was just going to say that fit. I totally agree. I remember me and my sister laughing at all those mid-90s comedies that are a bit problematic, some more than others nowadays. And we laughed like drains at them, absolutely. But particularly in terms of Ace Ventura's trans representation, it's so uncomfortable. I don't think I could actually watch that film all the way through nowadays, because there were extensive clips used of it on a really good, I think it's a Netflix documentary called Disclosure, which is presented by Laverne Cox, the trans actress who was in Orange is the New Black. And that used Ace Ventura as a case study. So yeah, there are a lot of those things that we were growing up with, and not just they seem quite nasty now in hindsight, don't they, really?
I mean, he did that whole parody of the crying game thing where he was like sobbing in, and it was like you watch it now and it's just like that's really just I have trans friends, and it would feels disturbing to me to watch that, and also think about how hard I laughed at the time when I first saw it.
But we all learn, don't we? And that's really important.
The Bond movies, funnily enough, though, I always thought there's like Diamonds Are Forever. I'm really into the Diamonds Are Forever headspace at the moment because I'm writing a book that's kind of like a homage to it. But that was every single film in the James Bond franchise. I was thinking Goldfinger's probably the original one, because Pussy Galore in the book, of course, was the head of she was called Pussy Galore because she was the head of a lesbian crime gang, and then you've got her represented in the film by Honor Blackman, who, like, we know from the Avengers, where she basically read off a script that was originally written for a male character. And it's like the Bond movies always seem to have had a lot of subversive or covert in gay representation in there that seems to have gone under the radar, would you say?
I would say so. Obviously, to use the P word again, problematic. There are, and I've explored this at length on, I was on a podcast about Diamonds Forever, with the Really 007 podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but we did an episode, about Diamonds Are Forever, and it ended up being 10 hours long, because there's so much to discuss about Diamonds Are Forever. And I sometimes think that License to Queer should be subtitled Diamonds Are Forever fan site, because I will defend that movie to the hilt, even though you've got really squirm-inducing bits with Winton Kid. But at least, as I always argue, at least you've got Winton Kid there. So I remember watching Diamonds Forever and going, "Oh, gay people exist," which sounds absolutely ridiculous. But you're talking about growing up feeling alone and isolated, and this sounds ridiculous now. And I wrote this in an article for recently for a teaching publication. And as I was writing it, I thought, I can't believe I'm actually admitting to this. But I genuinely thought I was the only one when I was growing up. And it was just like, this is madness, really. So even just having Winton Kid on the screen, I think, is really important. You are right that many of the other elements are more queer-coded, as we say. So you kind of have to join the dots up yourself. and particularly, I'm not sure it's particularly difficult to join the dots with Pussy Galore. But there are definitely other things, and even though there aren't many LGBTQ plus characters per se in Bond, but there are lots of characters who LGBTQ plus people relate to in Bond. And there was an academic about 40 years ago, Alexander Doty, who pointed out that actually it doesn't tend to be the films that feature LGBTQ plus characters which queer people really find resonate with them. It actually tends to be the stuff that features lots of straight characters. But if they're going through similar things to what queer people have been through, like feeling like an outsider, like not feeling like they conform to masculine or feminine stereotypical behavior in society, then they will latch onto those things. So there's, as I have explored at length and will continue to explore, the list of articles I've still, got to write is dozens long. There are so many parts of Bond which, whether intentionally or not, it doesn't really matter whether the filmmakers intended them to resonate with queer people, but they do.
And I find when reading the books again, there's so much stuff. James Bond is seen as like the most manly, masculine man who ever manned, and look at all the chicks he's banging because he's so straight. But then, especially when you read the books, Noel Coward made fun of Ian Fleming for describing Honey Rider's buttocks as looking like those of a boy. And then, was it Pussy Galore? He went into great length talking about her androgynous beauty and how she had the lips of, and it was like, you read that and you're like, this is, it seems there's an awful lot of homoeroticism in the books, especially.
Yeah, oh my God. And you know what? The Honey Rider one, I didn't even notice that consciously until you pointed it out. Was it as part of one of the book clubs?
Yeah.
And I think you made that comment, and I went and looked at that passage again because Doctor No isn't one of my favorite novels, but I do need to reread it, so I don't know it as well as some of the others. And I was like, how did I miss this? Or at least the first time. It's so flagrantly, as you said, homoerotic. And I mean, there is an argument that, and it was Susan Sontag who made it when she was writing about camp. She said that the sexiest things are always a combination of masculine and feminine. And I think you can certainly say that in the Bond films as well, because Sean Connery's performance is actually quite, I wouldn't go as far as saying effeminate in some ways, but it does have quite feminine qualities at times. And again, people think that Sean Connery is this ultimate man, but the way he moves is very smooth. And
he's like a panther.
Yeah, which is what, isn't that the description that Dana Broccoli made? He's like a panther.
I think that was
something like that.
I remember watching Diamonds Are Forever, and there was just one scene where he's putting his hands up, and he did this very flamboyant thing like that.
Oh yeah,
I remember.
Plastic.
But yeah, I think she used the term panther exactly, and then you watch it, and it's like, oh wow.
So I mean, Fleming was very familiar with a lot of particularly gay men in his inner circle, and he very much looked up to them so that he almost saw them as, particularly for his literary career, as like mentors. So there were these older gay men like Somerset Maugham, whose books I've only fairly recently got into. And then, as you say, Noel Coward, and there were he knew Cecil Beaton, who was the royal photographer and a gay man as well. So he moved in those circles, which is why I always find it interesting that he uses the word gay quite a lot in the books, and people often go, that's because gay meant happy in the 1950s and early 60s. Actually, no, it didn't. Well, it existed alongside, it had been around for several decades, meaning homosexual. And I think Fleming sometimes uses that word to almost give the game away as to what he's doing. Yeah. As I read the books, those kind of things jump out at me.
Yeah, I find it brilliant. And of course, so being in the intelligence community, there were so many people within the intelligence community who were targeted and blackmailed for being gay. And it's like, it was such he seemed quite out for the period. Not out, I mean, I think he was a deeply, deeply miserable heterosexual man, but he seems quite out about talking about those things in a period when it wasn't necessarily acceptable to do so.
And also, he's quite sympathetic, less so with lesbian characters, it must be said, but
Because
he's
they're
quite
women.
sympathetic. Yeah, exactly. Because lesbianism has never been illegal in this country because apparently male politicians didn't know what they did. So that's why apparently but gay characters. He even has in Moonraker, he has Bond say that he pities them,
Yeah.
which is not the most progressive thing to say, but at least Bond feels some degree of sympathy. And I always love that passage in From Russia with Love, where he's talking to the person who was a bit of a hangover. He's kind of Fleming is criticizing the World War II mentality of some intelligence operatives, and there's this one intelligence operative who's a bit of the old school, and he's basically describing all intellectuals as homosexual, and Bond says something like in return, not all intellectuals are homosexual. So it's almost like Bond is sticking up for homosexuals in a way.
It seems weird. I've always had this toss up. It's like, do you think Ian Fleming had some aspect of himself he was trying to repress and it came out, or do you think he just had that sympathy and that empathy as somebody? I always think that maybe he had some serious mother issues, and his relationships with women were kind of tainted by that, and he was kind of miserable. And I think the thing that I also find that I really enjoy about his books, and speaking about From Russia with Love, because it's a perfect example, is the relationships he has with other men as friends, which is such a weird thing. As I said, I never got into like the whole rugby club culture of a bunch of blokes getting together, getting drunk. But I have a handful of male friends who it's really great to have another guy to talk to and do stuff with and things. And Karen Bay and Felix Leiter are great examples of like how those are things that Ian Fleming writes about. And I think Karen Bay, especially in the movie, that works really well.
I'm always really cautious about speculating about people's sexuality, but everything you just said has crossed my mind multiple times about Fleming himself, and it's definitely always going to be a possibility, isn't it? He would never have labelled himself, possibly, because lots of people who are attracted to men don't label themselves as bisexual and gay and whatever, but I think that there's a possibility there, definitely. But I think definitely what you said is true about him um, prioritizing close male relationships. And Felix Leiter there's a great article on the website by another contributor, Kathleen Jowett, who opened my eyes to some of the parts with Felix Leiter. And there is really no reason for Felix Leiter to exist in some of the stories, let's be honest. I think Diamonds Forever is the best example, where literally there's no reason for Bond to be there, really, but there's certainly no reason for Felix to be there. And they spend most of that book. I mean, that book is so good for food and drink and stuff. It's almost like I have described it on a podcast as Felix and Bond's big gay holiday, because that's what it reads like to me. As you reread it just before Christmas, I was just like, it's just two dudes sharing a hotel room, having a great time. It's like, yeah, that's how it reads to me anyway.
That's brilliant, and it's funny the OSS 77 movies, the first one
Yeah.
was set where they had Jack Jefferson and him having that the reminiscence of their very homoerotic friendship, and it's like that was so made me immediately
And the
think of
joke is that he can't really come to terms with his bisexuality.
yeah.
But everyone around him is like, we don't care. You know, it doesn't matter to us, but and that ties in with, because obviously those films have got a lot to say about colonialism, and so, but he can't kind of accept that there's anything unconventional about him,
That's
which is hilarious.
Yeah, there was that article on that Marcus wrote. It was great. The fight scene where he says how he does that like that Connery neck snap and kills somebody, and it's almost like he's killing something else. And there was I haven't seen it with subtitles. I only seen it in French. But there was the scene on the beach after the LSD trip where he said very politely to the man, "It's like, do you mind removing your finger, because some people might
Yes.
misconstrue a finger between another man's thighs."
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think the subtitles are a little bit more to the point, actually. If you can excuse another point, another pun, because I think the finger does go somewhere.
Yeah.
I think that's the implication anywhere. But he's kind of like, does this make me gay? If I'm kind of getting some form of enjoyment out of this, so it's very much satirizing that fragile masculinity, that idea that just because you're enjoying something with another man makes you less of a man, which is hilarious.
But the other thing I always find really interesting about James is Ian Fleming. I kind of get the impression almost resented women to a certain extent. So I can't remember who it was who wrote it, where I read it, but they wrote about how it's like Ian Fleming resented women because he needed them to meet his sexual needs. But apart from that, it's like they were inconvenient and he didn't quite get them, and they were kind of. It was an interesting interpretation.
There is that startling passage right at the end of the last Bond novel, and I always stand up for the underdog. So the books and the films which others don't like, I tend to make it a point of finding their virtues. But The Man with the Golden Gun ends with that devastating passage about Bond would never find comfort with any woman. It was a room with a. It was like taking a room with a view, and the view would always pall. It's just like there is no way that Bond is ever going to be comfortable in the company of a woman, and it's really interesting because as you go through the books, and obviously he gets married, 2/3 of the way through the book series, and he plunges into a massive depression afterwards, and Man with the Golden Gun is him kind of resurfacing in a way. But a lot of the books, and I think it was definitely something you said that has made me, that has kept going around and around in my head, particularly the earlier books, they read very much like, and I'm wary that I'm stepping into your expertise, the territory that you're an expert in here, but they read more like romance fiction, because it is almost like in the films, Bond has to end up with the one girl at the end. But as the books go on, and particularly Man with the Golden Gun, there is no chance of it. And I know that Man with the Golden Gun was written by someone who knew he was on the way out, but that pessimism definitely creeps more and more into the books, I feel.
I think absolutely. I think there are rumors that Anthony Burgess finished off the Man with the Golden Gun, and there was sort of a rough thing, but there was definitely that melancholy there. I remember another thing we spoke about was there was that Greek poem that Lawrence Durrell translated, which was always meant a
Yeah.
lot to me, and that was like this very sad poem called "The City," about I've ruined my entire life because of all the choices I've made, and then that kind of mirrors that passage in particular from the Man with the Golden Gun, which sticks with me. And it's like, is it a man who's
That's the Cava. Is it Cavathy? I'm
yes,
not sure
that's
how to
it.
pronounce his name, but yeah, I read a little volume of his poems a few years ago, and I was just like, why is this guy not better known? It's unbelievable.
That's okay. So moving complete tax. You
Oh
said you were
God.
into a bunch of other stuff. I'm gonna throw out some things, and we'll see.
Okay.
They're like darts. Doctor
I'm
Who.
I'm gonna need some. I'm gonna need a stiff shot of
Stiff
Vimto.
shot of Vimto. Love that. How about Doctor Who?
Love Doctor Who until it went off the rails with Stephen Moffat. I know it's probably popular to hate on Stephen Moffat, but I loved his independent episodes, the individual episodes he wrote during the Russell T Davies era.
Yeah.
I always watched Doctor Who, a bit like Bond, really. I watched Doctor Who with my dad quite a lot growing up. A lot of the old William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton is his favourite Doctor Who. So I remember watching a lot of the Sylvester McCoy episodes and John Pertwee when they were rerun on TV as a kid. And I have watched some of the older episodes more recently, but definitely when Russell T Davies took over in 2005, those 5 series that he did are just some of my favourite things
Yeah.
ever.
I started watching them again with my kids because they're the age where they're getting it, and it's like I get to pick my
Yeah,
favorite episodes, and some of them, like Blink, wasn't that written by Stephen Moffat?
it was. Yeah, it
And
was.
that
Yeah.
to me is the best episode of Doctor Who ever because, and it's almost like the Doctor is a peripheral character of it.
Mine is Midnight from
Oh,
series 4.
yes, that's the one where they're
I
stuck on
think
the shuttle, isn't it?
there's no like particularly fancy effects. It was the cheap episode. So there's a technical term for this in the industry, which I can't remember. But every series, they have one episode which is not going to cost much money, so they can spread it for the rest. But I think sometimes having less money forces writers to be more creative. And I think what they came up with that in episode was brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, that was the other thing you said, the romance novels. Because I mean, I don't know how much you know about me, but my thing is I write romance novels. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Um, and I just started getting into this crazy thing. So normally I write romance novels with a bare-chested man on the
Wow.
cover and stuff like that.
They are large men.
They are indeed large men. It's funny. She ends up with both of them. But
Oh.
I started doing this thing. It was actually trying to show you. David Zaritsky from the Bond Experience. I remember I gave him a copy of one of my books, and he was like, "Oh, if it didn't have a bare-chested man on the cover, I might read this." So I've been doing this thing of actually publishing two versions of my romance books. One with a bare-chested man aimed at the female audience that I've already built up, and the other is like a safe for men cover because
That's that. No, go on.
because I think there are certain aspects of the way romance stories are told that work really, really well that actually resonate with men. And I think people kind of say like, "Oh, romance is what women like," and men like things and stuff. But I don't think that's always the case. And the early Ian Fleming books with the romance and the monogamy and things like that, that was what suddenly made me think that maybe romance books that have action and adventure and stuff would also appeal to men, because I think at the end of the day men don't want to bang every single woman like in the Roger Moore books, but Roger Moore films. Maybe it's they actually do want to. Most of the Bond fans I know are in committed relationships and aren't off gallivanting.
I mean, I know, I think you can probably work out which of the two covers I'd probably go for, Roland. But I actually and I feel really nervous admitting this. I actually I don't read that much romance fiction, perhaps because it does have that really feminine association. Even though I know a lot of romance fiction writers use nom de plumes,
Mhm.
and they're men writing as women. So I know that in my when I'm thinking about this rationally, I think, of course, there's nothing unmanly about reading romance fiction. But even a gay man like myself, if they're thinking I'm romance fiction isn't for me, that's that must be quite hard to break through. And obviously, I'm on the way to being converted. I have been purposely trying to read more romance fiction. But why do you think that barrier's there? Why do you is it because it's tied up with that whole, men don't talk about their feelings, men don't actually want, it's not cool to think monogamy is something to aspire for or to, or I don't know, why do you think?
And I think it is something to do with that. I've got a lot of friends who are really into the Adams family, and they talk about the Adams family was meant to be the complete reversal of what is normal, which is the husband is very much in love and devoted to his wife. His wife is interesting and
Mm.
independent. And it's like all of the things that are so subversive to what American culture is. You're a husband, you should resent your wife. Your wife should not find you attractive and not want to sleep with you. Your kids should be disrespectful. It's like the Simpsons is the cultural norm, and the Adams family, by being
Yes.
well adjusted, moved to that. And I think with romance novels, it's like the whole idea of people actually growing and developing and solving their own problems so they can be better to be with somebody else and things. These are not necessarily negative things, but they kind of get rejected by masculine culture because I don't know. Are they threatening? Are they? What is it? What is it that?
I find it interesting that I think it's on your Instagram bio. You describe yourself as a digital Don Draper with a Hemingway complex. Now, I love Hemingway. I love Mad Men. Where do you think that kind of, and I think I love those things because they are, I don't know, are they alternative masculinities? I don't know. Why do you love those things?
I think. Oh, I like that alternative masculinities. I think that's why I like Ian Fleming as well. It's like these are they sort of project like the stereotypical masculinity. It's like Ernest Hemingway is kind of like the blueprint for masculinity. Except if you read his stuff, he had self-doubt, he fell in love, he was weak, he was insecure, he had these strange things. There was this weird passage in a book he wrote where he went off with F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he discusses homosexuality in a lot, which you almost think he's like threatened by certain feelings that he has himself. And it's these characters, Don Draper and Ernest Hemingway, are broken people, except they're displayed as like these are men, except they are men with cracks and flaws, and that's why they kind of resonated and appealed to me.
And do you think it's possibly because, I mean, I'm thinking more well, I don't know, Draper sort of fits as well. Do you think it's because they feel like they aren't living up to, they've got anxiety about not living up to what society expects them to be like as men?
Yeah, I think that's true, and it's especially at the end of Mad Men. It's almost like the thing is when he suddenly is like, okay, I'm just going to be myself, and he literally like breathes out, and that's like the happy ever after. And it's like, I
Oh, do you think that then ends on a happy ever after?
no, not necessarily.
Oh.
I don't.
I know it's one of those amazingly ambiguous endings, but it's obviously spoiler warning for anyone who hasn't watched Mad Men. And please, but I view Mad Men is the ending is really pessimistic. And again, we probably project onto it what we think, but the fact that this is the spoiler alert, so skip forward a couple of minutes if you don't want to know. But it's almost like he comes up with the Coke advert,
Yeah.
and this might be completely wrong, but this is what I thought. So he comes up with the Coke advert, the famous, teach the world to sing advert, happy, clapping, everything. But he's doing this on a spiritual retreat. And I read that, and I see this in Bond as well sometimes. I read that as someone who really cannot switch off from work, and his only purpose in life is to perpetuate this cycle of pointless getting people to buy things. And I am projecting my own values onto this, I know. But that's how I see the end of Mad Men. I see it as a really unhappy ending.
Now, you might think I'm completely crazy for saying this. I interpreted it almost as he went to the spiritual retreat and he like retired and gave up and didn't do anything anymore, and maybe that Coke advert paid for him. And I don't think I have any justification for believing that. But in my ending, he was just kind of like he surrendered. He stopped trying to be something that he wasn't, and he literally had spent the entire series. He was took another man's identity. He bought the Cadillac because it says you've arrived. He had the beauty queen wife, and then he had the younger wife, and it's to my mind at the end he just like gave it all up. But isn't it weird how we have very different interpretations?
Mm.
Like
And I
wildly
mean,
different.
yeah. Well, it's great. And I mean, just going back to Hemingway for a second, I've only read about 4 or 5 Hemingway books, but I recently read a biography of Tennessee Williams, the
Yeah.
gay playwright who knew him quite well. And there's this whole section in there where he has this whole theory about Hemingway being gay. And I only found this out fairly recently, but actually there have been other biographers who've kind of, he did like dressing up in women's clothing, which doesn't make someone gay necessarily. But there are the stuff in the text as well, isn't there? So whether he, again, a bit like Fleming, whether he was gay or not, is largely immaterial. But he certainly felt some anxiety about living up to what people think of as a man. Yeah,
I totally
I'm
agree.
always drawn to, yeah.
Oh no, go. You're always drawn to.
I'm always drawn to those stories, and I don't think it's just because I'm gay. I think it's because a lot of men, I think, are probably waking up to this a bit more and being a bit more conscious about it and starting to have these conversations, which I think is just really, really healthy.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that absolutely. It's funny. I just read a Movable Feast, and it was his memoir of Paris, and there were sections in there where it's like, oh, this is. He discusses homosexuality in the same way that Ian Fleming does, which is kind of like
Mm,
he's trying to convince himself more than anybody else.
yeah.
But to me, it's almost like the authenticity is what I see coming through from his writing. But his life was kind of miserable because he had this idea of masculinity. He went off to fight in the Spanish Civil War for honestly that just seemed like egotism. He was like, I'm going to go and fight in a war. And then he ended up killing himself. Why? Because he was in such pain and he wasn't able to do the physical manly things that he wanted. And it's kind of like he is the definition of fragile masculinity.
Yeah, absolutely, totally.
And I
Do
think
you?
Oh,
No, go for it.
I was going to say, I think the reason that he and Don Draper resonate with me is because they are you you can see the cracks in them, and it's like it validates the fact that there are cracks in me as well, and in everybody. I think
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in summation, maybe men should be reading far more romance fiction, and the world would be a happier place.
absolutely. Oh, I love that. That's a
Do you? I mean, in all seriousness, though, just going back to something that you started me thinking about a few weeks ago, do you think that the Bond, particularly the early ones, sort of have a romance? I'm always fascinated by narrative structure. And do you think that the earlier books have more of a romance fiction narrative structure to them? I suppose you're putting it to the test at the moment, aren't you? At the moment,
Actually, yeah. So that's really interesting. I was on the first Bond book club where we talked about Casino Royale, and I think it was Joe Darlington said it's like it reads like a romance book, and David said that as well. But I hadn't really thought about it. But then there is the whole thing. He falls in love with one woman. He's almost quite passive and beta in the way he talks to her. It's like, "Are you okay, love? What's wrong, love? What's?" It's almost codependent, which is something because
mm,
I think Ian Fleming had this big thing with his mother, and he could never quite get over. He could never have a relationship with another woman because he'd be cheating on his mother, and it was almost like this codependency, this being having to be validated by another woman's opinion of you is an interesting one. You're like, wow, he's really getting
mm,
into this, isn't he? But there was Tiffany Case. He writes about the breakup of their relationship. Diamonds Are Forever ends with him and Tiffany Case together, and then Tiffany Case, he and her have a terrible relationship, and she ends up cheating with him. And then there's that wonderful line about he goes off to meet this guard at the U.S. embassy to shoot him, and then they end up going for a drink together. And it's kind of like it's the way relationships are described in the earlier books definitely have more of a real relationshipy type of vibe, and the books do have more of a narrative arc based around, I
mm.
think, a romance novel. They acknowledge women exist as things that aren't. You don't just have to stick your penis in to prove that you're heterosexual.
And to what that's really interesting. Bond, I always think it's curious that the deepest connections that Bond tends to have is where he's got a bit of a savior complex going on. So it's
Yes,
like he's having to. So to what extent is that kind of writ large across a lot of romance fiction, and the men are often painted as that kind of character?
I find that really interesting. I think that Bond's savior complex to me reads as kind of like codependency. It's like he
Right.
validates his own existence by helping other people. In romance books, uh, it once I got into how they work, it just blew my mind because the way men are presented in romance books as the kind of figures that women would want to be, that women are attracted to, compared
Yeah.
to, say, the male characters you have in male written romance things like Garden State and stuff like that, are so different. Women like men who are confident, women like men who can look after, who can provide for themselves because then they can provide for other people. I always say it's one of the rules I have when I write a book is the man doesn't fix the female character, but the man gives the female character the opportunity to be able to fix herself.
Oh wow. Okay.
There are certain rules that I come up with that sound so pretentious. Like the first one
No.
is when you write a romance novel, you have to fall in love with the female character. Because one of the things that
Right.
turns readers off is the female character. A lot of female readers will sort of place themselves into that, and they can be flawed and they can make mistakes, but you want this man to feel to love them. That's almost what romance novels sell to a reader is love, and the feeling of being loved, accepted, validated, worthy of somebody caring for you.
Do you think that, I mean, that seems that if that's how the genre works, then, and I'm certainly no expert, and I'm mulling all that over now, but if that's how the genre works, do you think that that's how real life actually works? Do you think that's what women really want from a man, or is it kind of in the same territory as when we read a James Bond book? Probably none of us really would want to be James Bond, warts and all. There's bits of him we might kind of try and emulate, but
Genital
it's
warts and
still
all.
fantasy. Well, yes, quite. It's still a fantasy, and the fantasy is what's exciting and appealing, rather than. Do you think women actually? I don't know, have any women actually said, I would love to, you know, be in a relationship with your character that you've created?
No, I think you nailed it. I think you absolutely nailed it. When I do adverts for my books, I have a little video of this guy on a motorcycle with this girl behind him holding her arms out like that, and the word comes up escape, because what I'm selling is escape. And it's literally, I
Yeah.
think my readers have lives like the rest of us, and life is kind of shitty sometimes, and they just wish that somebody on a Harley Davidson would pull up outside their window and say, come with me, we're going to have some hot sex, some adventures. I am going to absolutely adore you, and every other woman in the world is going to be invisible to me. I love everything about you, including your stretch marks. And then at the end of the adventure, you couldn't just toss them in the garbage and go back to doing the washing up. And I think that's the same as James Bond books. James Bond books
Yeah.
allow you to fit into James Bond and be like, oh, okay, instead of cleaning the cat litter, I'm going to go off to Tokyo and have this cool adventure and drink sake and sleep with beautiful naked pearl divers and walk through the Garden of Death or whatever. I think it is the escapism, and I think it's the escapism of both. The escapism of both work very well together, and I think there's the one thing that I really like is there's also that validation. You get to go on a wild adventure, but there is somebody there who's also like, we're on this wild adventure, but hey, you are okay exactly as you are, and I love you.
Wow. That makes an awful lot of sense. Yeah, absolutely. Have you found that your own writing has, because I know we talked briefly about this before, but have you found that your own writing has kind of, I don't know, helped make the world make a bit more sense in the
Absolutely.
last year or so?
Yeah, I just published a book, which I never intended to write, which was a complete mess, and it's like a therapy session. I joke about it because I'm completely joking about this. It's not something I would ever actually do, but I joke that it was a 160,000 word suicide note in which the author talks himself out of it. But it's just, I think last year I went through a lot of depression. There were a lot of issues and things like that, and this book was my opportunity to go through a journey in like a heightened escapist environment, and and it was weird because normally you write about the female character, the male character being in love with her and validating her. And to a certain extent, it was almost the reverse in this. The woman, I was trying to empower the female character by putting her in charge of this big biker gang while the guy went through some shit. But also, the guy got through the shit because she loved him, and that's probably a very bad thing to like put your entire reason for going on in the hands of somebody else. But at the same time, I think sometimes, especially as a guy in the world, sometimes you just do want someone to be like, it's okay, you're okay, we love you, just get through this, keep your shit together, I got your back.
That's made me think, in real life, do women, some women, find that vulnerability attractive? I would think yes.
I I think so. I would be so interested to hear women's opinion of this because I don't, I'm just a dumb guy who happens to write stories like this, but I like to think I've learned a bit. I kind of think that what women find attractive is a guy who's got his shit together, who loves her and only her, and that's pretty much it. Women aren't actually that demanding. It's like if you got your shit together and you're not going to cheat on me, that's kind of, those are two big good things that are the foundation of like a man you might be attracted to.
I'll take your word for it on that one.
Well, I don't know. I would be so interested to, because I mean the things like about bikers that I think women find attractive is they're guys who just like fuck society's rules. I'm gonna go Harley Davidson, a load of tattoos, a beard, a ponytail, whatever it is that we're not allowed to have. And I think women find people who are authentic attractive, and people who
Do
are
you think
willing
that
to.
goes back to you're probably very consciously aware of this, but do you think that goes back to the whole wandering loner cowboy archetype?
I'm sure of it. I'm sure that my psychology has gone exactly round, and that's why I've ended up in the same place. I mean, my brother was super into Bon Jovi, and there was a line from Bon Jovi's song where it's like, "I'm a cowboy on a steel horse I ride," and I remember to these days. I even in my book I describe their motorcycles. I'm a very cliched, hackneyed writer, by the way. I describe their motorcycles as steel steeds and stuff because it is almost like the modern day cowboy myth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that sounds. I will get around to reading Roland. Honestly, I will, because I am determined to read more romance fiction because it is a blind spot in my reading. Absolutely.
Well, let me. I've got this crazy scheme that I'm doing at the moment, which is one of my shticks that I really really love. And there's a member of the Bond community called Dr. Lisa Funnell, and she's written like
Oh yeah,
six books on this subject. Is taking a typical masculine thing like an action movie, and I've got a book called Codename Mistletoe, where I said, okay, I'm going to take Die Hard and I'm going to rewrite it as a romance novel. And
love it.
I found it so interesting because you have to kind of reinvent certain aspects of it because a romance novel forces you to be more disciplined. If the way I write romance novels, you have a chapter from a male point of view and then the chapter from the female point of view. So therefore, you have to have a female character who tells 50% or more of the story, which Die Hard it doesn't really happen, even though you have one. So it's kind of interesting to like how can you elevate that. What I want to do at the moment is, and I'm working on one at the moment, is write a series of romance novels that are loosely, to a point where I can't be sued by the estate of Ian Fleming, inspired by the movies of James Bond. And I'm starting off with one based very loosely on Doctor No. And the first thing that you got is in the James Bond novels, James Bond films, there's a different Bond girl every single thing.
Yeah.
Same Bond, different girl. Whereas, like, if you write it as a romance novel, all romance novels have to have happily ever after. The guy can only ever be with one girl. So every single book, you have to have a different agent who ends up having a happily ever after with a female character. And then you think also the female characters, like in Doctor No, you've got Sylvia Trench and you've got Honey Rider, and it's like, well, you can't have both, so you kind of maybe squish them together into a character and start telling the story. So, you have a chapter from the secret agent's point of view, then a chapter from her point of view, and it's like, when you start thinking of where she comes from and what her motivations are and how she gets involved in the story, it changes everything. And it's so interesting to take something that's a masculine formula, put it into a romance formula, and see what comes out. And it's something new and it's something different that's both familiar and kind of unique.
Someone's honking.
Oh,
Yeah, some. It's really interesting that you went for Die Hard because one of my favorite movies ever. But it has that. I can totally see that structure, and of course it's a western in a way, isn't it? As
yeah.
well, all the references to Roy Rogers and Grace Kelly, Gary Cooper. It's got all those ingredients. I think there's a lot of almost like, dare I even say, closeted romance stories out there. A lot of those really as you've been talking, I've been thinking about all those other stories which are very masculine, but actually, when you nail it down, most of them end up, and this goes back to Shakespeare as well, and even before, classic, stories in the ancient world. This is that kind of desire to end up with the happily ever after, one man, one woman, and so that's there in most stories. So how do you kind of decide, how much difference there is between an outright romance story and something masquerading as a romance story?
I don't know. But the other thing that I think is interesting that you just mentioned, it's not one man, one woman. With this book series that I'm writing, I actually want to do, like, Diamonds Are Forever should be a love story between two men. I think it would be a disservice to write the book that you're writing based on that if you didn't have that.
Yeah.
And then other books, there's this book here. She actually ends up in a happy ever after with two men. Which,
Scandalous.
I know, absolutely scandalous. And there's another one I wrote where for 15 years this hero and heroine were together, and then they broke up and each had their happily ever afters with someone else. Because relationships do end, and maybe you're not meant to be with that one person forever. Maybe it's someone else, but you do have that chapter. It's like all these.
That's what intrigues me. Yeah, I mean, because Bond is actually extremely monogamous. Obviously, there's a different woman every story, or multiple women. Ian Fleming defended himself, didn't he, saying one woman a year isn't too bad. When a journalist said that it was filth that he was writing, and he always used to get quite defensive, didn't he? But it's interesting that the Bond. Going back to one of the first things you asked about why it appeals to queer people, for a long time, I didn't think that happy ever after would ever be possible. So, growing up as a kid, I never had, I certainly didn't have marriage in my head as a possibility because it wasn't a possibility. And it's that well, not to put too fine a point on it, I never thought I'd find someone. So a lot of queer people grow up with that element, and I think kind of like the Bond series has its cake and eats it, because you do have the monogamous one man and one woman, but by the next story, he's moved on to somebody else. So it kind of works for people who, you know, you know, until fairly recently, just straight relationships who wanted to settle down with one person. But it also works for people who think they're never going to end up with someone as well.
I think that's genius. That completely blew my mind because I was thinking I used to think I'd never have a relationship being ginger. Like, you know, I was disastrous with girls then. So it appealed to me the fact that he got his cake to eat it. He could, you know, have this brief, wonderful relationship with this beautiful woman, but then, you know, in the next book he'd start, or next film he'd start off with another one because she'd never, you know, learned that he eats cookies in bed and leaves the crumbs on there, and all these other terrible habits about why he's not deserving of love and he's a shameful person. So you get to go from relationship to relationship and enjoy all the perfect parts of them, and then not have to worry about the crap that happens in a real relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So there we go. We've cracked the formula.
We have, and you know, we've gone a little over time, so I'm going to
Oh,
wrap
have
this.
we?
No,
Oops.
it's been so enjoyable though. I want to do another one. Well, I don't know. You might get off and be like, "Oh my god, what a ghastly guy."
No, it's been great. Honestly, I'm, you know, working in education, we get to have literary discussions with our pupils and with colleagues and that sort of thing. But my husband's hardly illiterate, but he doesn't necessarily read the same sorts of things. So we kind of have some different reading tastes. He loves really horrible, like detective fiction with lots of gore in there, and Patricia Cornwell. And I have a low threshold for gory, horrible things. So no, it's been really, really nice. Thank you, Roland, for
I'm
setting
just
this
writing
up.
down the quote of the episode is going to be, "My husband is hardly illiterate."
Yeah, well, yeah, damn
Out
it
of
with faint
context, that's
praise.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Don't listen to this, Anthony. Don't watch this video.
but it was wonderful. Right, I'm gonna stop recording now. But oh, before we go, okay, tell me, where can we go and find out everything that you're working on? License2queer.com is it .com or .co.uk?
Yeah, it's .com, and it's licensed the way that the film title is, with the British spelling,
Yeah.
with two C's in it. I always do British spelling on the website. Sorry, American readers.
No, that's
I'm not
one
some.
word I can't compromise on. It just looks stupid.
Yeah, so that's on there. So yeah, licensequeer.com, and if you and it's on Instagram and Twitter. Both of those, very active on those. It is on Facebook as well, but I never get around to updating that one. So that's kind of the neglected part, which I don't have time for. If you're interested in the kind of education side of me and that kind of stuff, I do have another Twitter account, which is David T. Lowbridge, which I've had for years and years. And there's a LinkedIn on there as well, which links to education articles. If you're interested in those, and I've got those worlds are sort of merging a little bit at the moment. I've got a chapter in a book coming out in the next few months, which is called The Everyday Lives of Gay Men. So I contributed one of the chapters to that as well. So that'll be out in October, I think that's being released. So yeah, writing lots and lots of stuff at the moment. Like you, I've found writing to be something of an escape from the uncertainties of the everyday. So this is it's the ultimate therapy, isn't it? Because it demands your concentration.
You
And
go
it
into like
lets
that
you
flow state, and it's just
oh,
download all the crap in your head.
it's just bliss, and it's like, where's 5 hours gone? Yeah.
Oh, well, that's right. And so, yeah, go and check those out. And I mean, honestly, I think the articles that you post on License to Queer are amazing. Like, there's some of the. I don't read as many blogs as I used to because we're kind of past that. But your ones, I will lose myself in every article that you post. So I
Oh,
think they're
thank you.
terrific.